Good afternoon. Welcome to Digital Hollywood Fall 2019 Creative Masterclass. For those of you who have been in here before, I usually have lovely slides to introduce everybody. Today, because I am told it's because Mercury is retrograde, the technology is not working. So I'm sorry to deprive you of that. We will move on as best we can. I'd like to start by introducing Lydia Porto. Lydia has appeared in a number of films, including Scary Movie 5, Horrible Bosses 2, as well as many other things that don't have numbers after them. In Get Shorty, she plays the villainous Amara, and the drug dealer who decides to mix business with romance. She's currently appearing in season 2 of the Jack Ryan series, and she has just directed her first short film. Tim Zajaros produces and finances films through his company, Armory Films. The Peanut Butter Falcon is currently in a theater near you, and it is to your best interest to go see it. We have applause in the front row. It is amazing. When I wasn't laughing, I was crying. My crystal ball says it's going to be a contender for many awards this season. He has also done Mudbound, Arctic, The Billionaire Boys Club, and Siberia. Don Hanfield was creator, executive producer, and writer on the History Channel series Nightfall. He wrote and produced Throwaways, produced The Founder, and he is producing the remake of The Housemaid. He created and wrote the graphic novel Rift, which became part of the Amazing Stories series for Apple TV, produced by Steven Spielberg. His recent comic book, The Mall, was just optioned for a TV series by Ivan Reitman's Montecito Pictures, and his future projects include the film adaptation of Switched On, a memoir of brain change and emotional awakening. Adam Kolbrenner, producer and manager at Lit Entertainment. His current productions include Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds, Ghost Draft with Chris Pratt, Christmas Chronicles with Kurt Russell, and what is the one with?
Raised by Wolves.
Thank you, Raised by Wolves, directed by Ridley Scott for HBO Max. My bad, I am totally sorry. And that's because I'm very old. My credits include Knight Rider, Love Boat, Heart to Heart, Foul Play, True Confessions, Search for Tomorrow, and most recently I wrote a comic book for Stan Lee prior to his passing on to a new marvelous universe. So, let's start by talking about the big question we all have. Everybody wants a great idea. How do you recognize a great idea when you hear it?
Oh, you want me to start?
Yes, I do.
Okay. How do you recognize a great idea when you hear it? Well, first thing I think is you have to understand what the story is that is trying to be told. You have to understand what medium that the creator is trying to tell that story in. And I think the big thing for me is I think we've seen a lot of stories, and we've seen them done over and over and over again in varying ways. I think the key is finding a great story that has been told in a far different way that we've never seen before. So having the ability to recognize the past and also the future. So we hear an idea knowing, okay, that sounds familiar, but here is what makes it different. So without telling the same story over and over again, doing something moderately to extremely differently is the key, in my opinion.
Interesting. What do you think, Don?
To me, everything Adam said I think is accurate. I also look for a theme. So like a great idea, great story, but there's also a theme underneath it that is something that, sometimes when you're developing an idea, it's 4, 5, 12 years of your life. So you want to know that it's not just a great idea, but there's something beneath it that's something that in that dark night when no one is, taking your calls or wanting to make this thing, you can dig into and really, it's worth the sweat equity or the chi, as I say. Whatever the story, whatever is underneath the story is worth saying.
I agree with them as well. Pretty much everything is a remake in some capacity now. It's the same stories just being told in different ways, and I think, the difference is trying to find, if there is a truly original idea, that's great, but usually it's it's a familiar story told in an original way. But in addition to that, also knowing that there's an audience for it, because there's a lot of really good stories out there, but they're not necessarily stories that people want to watch. Some might be too dramatic, or, I mean, for whatever reasons, they might not have an audience. So it isn't, aside from being a good story, you need to know who the audience at least could be.
Well, how do you do that? What is your process for finding out who the audience might be? Do you do any kind of analytics on previous movies, or do you sit down and do psychographics based on the topic or the actor?
We don't do any of that, no. I mean, it starts, I guess, with myself, you know what I mean? So, like, for me, if everything that we do pretty much, it's generally because we really loved it and we were gravitating towards it. So if we want to see it, that's the first litmus test, you know? And I don't really want to make a movie I don't want to see unless it pays me a lot of money, then maybe I'll do it. Yeah, and then you just, I don't know, I don't think that there's any specific way to determine really what the audience is these days. I feel like it's changing so often, you know. It was horror and dark movies were big, and now people don't really want to see dark movies anymore, with the exception of The Joker. That was that one clearly did pretty well. So I don't know. It's partially a gut thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say, like, if you think about, like, Tim's movie, which is amazing, Peanut Butter Falcon, I mean, that's a movie that you could look at it from a standpoint of just like, oh, the audience is people who are connected to a certain subset or special needs or whatever. But if you watch that movie, it's really about friendship and family and acceptance and not being limited by what people think you can do. I mean, those are like universal themes that I think anyone who watches that movie, it will appeal to. And I think that's why it's been so successful and why it's such a beautiful film. So to me, it's that. It's like, you know, great story, well acted, but there's, you know, we're all human beings. At a certain level, the demographic thing goes away, and you're just about, you know, the humanity of it comes through and the emotion, and that's what I think appeals to everybody.
See, here's something else that's interesting, because when I saw that, one of the themes that popped out to me was the grieving of lost time and lost potential, as well as the loss of a family member. So how much of audience identification do you think we're missing?
Can I pass that question?
What do you mean by audience identification? What do you mean by that?
So as we target audiences, we think we know specifically who's going to appeal to something. I mean, I went to it because I have a disabled son, and I literally laughed and cried through the whole thing. But I saw different themes than you saw.
Yeah.
So how much, I mean, do we need a system that helps us identify and target audiences more effectively, or?
No.
I mean,
And the reason why is I think if there was some sort of system, then like people would try to like create a machine that would then develop these sort of stories. I mean, I think part of the problem right now with the industry in and of itself, I mean, TV, in my opinion, has become the new film because for the most part, this is just my opinion, movies aren't good. There's like, movies are just okay now, you know? I think that they're trying to tick like certain boxes, like action or a big star or big set pieces, and that's what is going to drive people to the theaters. And I just think the quality of the films in general has gone down because I think there is a system that they put in place and they aren't thinking about the story. Like, story has somehow been lost. And I think in identifiable characters and storylines to a large degree have been lost. That's why I think Peanut Butter Falcon did work, because I think, and not to reference my own movie, but people can identify with a lot of the themes in that story. Okay, it centers on a person with Down syndrome that's chasing a dream, but really it's just a person that's chasing a dream that happens to have Down syndrome.
Yeah. So Lydia, what is it about a script that you look for that makes you decide you want to live inside that character for a while?
It challenges me. Like, it's not me, anyway.
I like stunts. So if you send me a script that has stunts, I will look at it.
That's cool.
I like that. Several of my films have had stunts. And if anybody's following Get Shorty, we had a really great long sequence in our episode last Sunday between me and Ray Romano, which was a whole lot of fun. Took like 13 hours to shoot and was really great. So I think I love to see scripts that give me something unexpected, a little bit of a twist, something that's not what you would normally think of me playing. I think it's funny that when I first got here, I've always been sort of like a little bit twisted, like my roles are always a little bit off. But when I got here, I did one of those branding workshops that they encourage you to do. And I had my little sentence, and it was like, Lydia's the sweet, lovable, helpful social worker or nurse who lives next door and is going to take care of you. And it's like, and then I got Amara de Escalones, so it only goes to show. So I guess I love that. I'm currently looking for a role in which I will be able to speak French, because I speak French fluently, and I haven't been able to use that on screen yet. I'm working on Vita, which is a show on Stars, and frankly, we've been courting each other ever since they started, and they kept saying they were going to wait until they found the right role, and they did. So I'm going to be doing a 3-episode arc on Vita, which I think is going to be pretty awesome. And I just worked on Superstore, and they're bringing me back on better things, and so it's kind of, I kind of love getting a script that maybe is a role that isn't my brand,
Well,
But I'll play my brand too. I'll just bring my own.
this
thing
past
to it.
week's episode was certainly not what I would consider the brand for a sweet, lovely person. Adam, right now we're in peak TV. They keep saying peak TV, and it keeps growing and growing, and there's new networks and new streamers all doing stuff, which is way over 500 scripted series. How do you sift through all that clutter to find the best projects for your clients?
Well, I think, first of all, I think you have to start with you mean in terms of putting clients on staff of these shows?
Yeah.
Oh, for staffing purposes, it's connecting understanding who the writer is and who the potential writer for that staff is, and having an understanding of their background, what makes them unique, what makes them diverse, what makes them specific to those shows, and in a way you sort of act as kind of a filter to a certain extent, to filter out who the writer is that connects to why this show needs somebody like that. It's a process, and I think what we're seeing in terms of peak TV, traditionally everyone always talks about staffing season for television, which usually takes place after the upfronts for network TV for broadcast, May to July. And I think what we're seeing now is that it's a year, it actually never stops. So there's staffing season in the traditional format still exists for broadcast, but it goes year round, and all the cable shows, the streaming shows are kind of, nonstop. And you just have to be aware of really who the writer is and why they make sense for it. The way I would explain it best is somebody who's only written comedy who really wants to work on a show like Get Shorty, you have to connect that. It has to make sense. There's definitely a tone with Get Shorty that could cross over, but if the comedy writer who's only worked on half-hour shows wants to go work on, NCIS or something like that, there's too much of a gap. You have to find your platform that's going to cross over.
Okay. Don, one of the reasons I keep asking you to come back on my panel is that you keep doing different things. And I wonder if you could talk about how you switch easily from different genre to different kind of tones of voice of your project. And is that something you do by choice, or just something pops up and you have to do it because it's so perfect for you? Or do you go out and look for something different each time?
I mean, I think a couple things. I mean, one is I have a massive case of ADD, so that's probably most of it. But again, to me, it's about theme. Again, a theme sort of crosses over different genres, and sometimes I'm doing a movie right now about the current president of Somalia. Heard his story on KCRW about 8 years ago. Reached out to him. He was a guy who was working in a cubicle at the Department of Transportation in Buffalo, New York. Got invited to be the prime minister of Somalia, and then now is the president of Somalia. He recently won the election. So, and that, to me, that story is really about democracy and sort of how a guy who's not corrupt could win the presidency in, a very corrupt system. And that's the story that's a drama. And maybe there's a bit of Joseph Heller in there, maybe some Coen brothers, or even Frank Capra in there as well. But, also to me, it's about what's the medium for telling it. I mean, when I was doing film exclusively, I saw TV, and that's when I did Nightfall. And when I was doing Nightfall, I was exclusive for TV and wanted to develop other stuff, so I started doing comic books. And, I just found it to be a very freeing. I mean, as a creator, there's no better medium than comic books. And one of the things I'm trying to do is bring more of my film and television writer friends into that medium, because they'll never have more creative freedom, they'll never have more creative control, and the budget's the same whether you blow up. Artists hate when I say this, but the budget's the same whether you blow up San Francisco or just have two people talking.
The thing that I noticed about, and being a total novice in this area, is that it's the closest thing to directing without getting on a set. Because the writer gets to determine everything that's going into the different frames.
Yeah.
And I'm the only person in Hollywood who doesn't want to direct, because I don't like being on the set. I will go if I have to, I'll be cordial and lovely, but I hate that process. So this is something that's very freeing and opening, and now you and Tim are working together.
Yes, Tim and I have known each other for years and have wanted to work together. We had a couple film projects we put together, but they were just interested in what I was doing in the comic space, and I had a comic book I was doing, and I said, "Do you guys want to come on board?" And and they were like, "Yeah," and it's been a great relationship and really positive, and I think they've liked the process, and I've enjoyed working with them, so yeah. Hope to do more. We actually have one, we're doing one that I created, but we're also doing one that I'm just producing. So it's another writer, they brought me material that I love that we're making into a graphic novel now, so.
So Lydia, how difficult or fun is it to go from Get Shorty to Jack Ryan?
It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I shot that Jack Ryan episode last year. It was as a result of Amara. Somebody had seen an episode of Amara, and I got brought in and told that they were very excited to find me. But I also got to work with some the actor who's in that scene with me has done Game of Thrones, and it was a really great experience. Jack Ryan is in a top-notch series, really amazing work. And I was directed by Denny Gordon, who's a longtime director of television and a woman, and I kind of am interested in directing. I built a really good relationship over the last 3 years with MGM, which is our production company, and have been brought into meetings with the executives and looking for different things that I could maybe do in the future with them, bringing ideas to them, or maybe shadowing directors in the future. I met with the Carla Vargas, who heads up their Latino division. They just finished producing a whole telenovela for Netflix on Luis Miguel, so looking at doing things in Spanish. So it's like I said, I think that Amara is a very unique character, and in the back of my mind, there's sort of like, well, there's never going to be another Amara, so there's sort of finding things that are just other women. There are other women, but it's not too difficult. I feel like she is a little bit a part of other things that I do as well.
So Adam, since you're a producer and a manager, which do you look for first, the client or the project?
I'm definitely a manager first. I think that I take that kind of job very, very seriously, but I think as far as the producing role that I take on, it's you have to be fully passionate and kind of in love with that project, because you know, and I think everybody up here would say the same, which is every time you say yes to something as a producer, you know that that is years and years of your life before it ever comes to fruition. So you have to be wildly passionate about that. And I think for the most part, for me, in the way that I've gone, it's born from the relationship that I have with the client and our development process, which is very deep. It's a long-term development process, and from that, comes the films, comes the television shows. So those are the results are there. I don't necessarily look for just stuff as a producer. To me, that's somebody else's work. I have too much respect for the producers that actually work in that capacity. For everything that I work on as a producer, I'm partnered with great producers as well. So it's not something I take on as a solo artist. I do it with other people, and it makes things better and easier ultimately by having great partners.
So I want to ask you about this one project because I liked it a lot. Christmas Chronicles. Now you're doing the sequel, because I'm sorry, if I asked for a show of hands, every adult woman, how many of you would say Santa Claus? Yes, of course, Kurt Russell, right? So how did that project come together?
Christmas Chronicles and the sequel coming next year on Netflix was an idea from a client of mine in New York who is a writer named David Guggenheim, who had written Safe House. He had written Designated Survivor. He created for ABC the Kiefer Sutherland Show. So when he comes up with an idea for a Christmas movie, as I was saying earlier, it doesn't exactly add up. So what I did was I took that idea, his core idea for the Christmas film, gave it to another writer of mine named Matt Lieberman, who loved it, who's more in the family space, he's written a whole bunch of family movies, and Matt wrote this one as a spec, and then I had gotten it together with, I'd set it up with Christopher Columbus's company, who makes sense for a Christmas type of movie. We were sort of figuring out what to do, and then it was Netflix who came to me and said, we need a movie for Christmas 2018. What do you have? I need a Christmas movie. And I said, I have one. And that was it. Christmas films aren't exactly a mandate for companies to make, but Netflix gives us that the new boost of making films that we all want to see. They just don't make them anymore, and now they do.
Mm-hmm.
And just for the record, best music video ever.
The Christmas Chronicles?
Yeah, I made my husband go back and watch it 3 times with me.
It's Kurt Russell in jail as Santa, so how can you lose, really?
Yeah.
So now we're going into awards season. And Tim, this is your second cycle because you went through it with Mudbound. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure that you're going to go through it again with Peanut Butter Falcon. So how do you approach that? You've already created a movie. It's in the theaters. Theoretically, it's the time to go, oh, it's over.
No, it's not over, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, the process is pretty crazy. I mean, it's like you're running for office. There's just the amount of events that you have to go to, and you never really realize how many award shows there are until, I think with Mudbound, I probably went to 8 or 9 award shows. You're like, how many times can we pat ourselves on the back? But yeah, it's a different animal. We pretty much are at when you're in the process, you have publicists that are specific to awards campaigns, and they pretty much tell you where to go and what to do. But you got to do a lot of that. Whereas with Netflix and Mudbound, they had so much money. So, there was like 8 or 9 people, in every single department, an area that would be there to basically plan everything and set everything up, whereas this time it's a much smaller campaign on our end, so we actually have to really go out there and kind of pound pavement because we need people to see the movie, we need votes, and it's just it's an extraordinarily important movie for all of us involved, so everybody's really motivated to go out there and try to get votes.
So, Don, I have a question, too, that I'm pretty sure a lot of people here would want to know, because it's not an award per se, but it's kind of like one of those lifetime awards everybody wants. You do a graphic novel called The Rift, which I've read, and it's amazing. And then somehow Steven Spielberg says, I'm going to produce this. How does that happen?
Man, well, that graphic novel was written as a love letter to Steven Spielberg, really. I mean, when we were kids, like the TV shows all had something, I guess I call emotional catharsis, where you get kind of this emotional feeling, this kind of feel-good feeling, whether it was, I mean, and when you told me your credits, I was like stoked. I mean, all those shows are like my childhood. But like whether it was like really obvious, like Highway to Heaven, or less obvious, like Quantum Leap, I mean, all those shows, Fantasy Island even, it was all about this emotional catharsis. And I felt like that was missing in the TV space and wanted to write something that kind of spoke to that. So we wrote The Rift, and I was repped at an agency at the time that actually represented Steven Spielberg for TV, and I said, hey, I wrote this graphic novel for Steven Spielberg, will you get it to him? And they kind of laughed at me. I mean, they were like, and nothing ever happened with it. And then I just was lucky enough to be friends with a guy who was partnered with an actor who worked with Steven Spielberg, and he read the graphic novel, and he's like, I love this, I'd love to give it to my friend, my partner. His partner is the actor who's Ed Burns, who was in Saving Private Ryan. And he gave it to Steven, and he called me on a Sunday, and he's like, Steven Spielberg read your script, and he loved it. And I was like, you could have told me he hated it, and I would have been happy that he read it. So it was, it was one of those moments that are few and far between, where you're just kind of like, wow, and it's a dream come true for me. He's obviously one of my heroes, and just a guy that everyone, I think, aspires to work with. And so I'm lucky to that he responded to it.
You're massively humble about that. That's cool. What happens, and this is for all of you, and please talk among yourselves, what happens when a pet project doesn't get made, when something you really, really care about? Is there a point where you go, all right, I'm done, I give up? Or is there something that just makes you keep going?
Well, the great ones never die, like the Goonies. They stay around forever. You don't let them go. If you believe in it, then whether it takes 1 year or 11 years, eventually you get them all made. Until literally you've tried everything, and then you just wait for the next round of financing or new platform or new way to get something made comes along, and boom, you get Netflix and you get to make Christmas movies. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, I think that's why sometimes the good idea, or the good concept, I call it, like I've had a couple good concepts that I find myself like 5 years deep, and it's just like, why am I doing this? It's like, but the things that really speak to you and have a bigger meaning, and it's the thing that you're just passionate about forever, you're going to find the right place for it. Because I mean, as there's a saying, there's a rump for every seat, I guess. I mean, you're going to find that person that responds to it, or that place that wants to do it. It just sometimes takes time, and sometimes it's all about timing. I mean, rom-coms, if you guys remember, were dead years ago, and then someone did one called Sweet Home Alabama that made a bunch of money, and then everyone's doing rom-coms again, and it's a cycle, and I think then the rom-coms that they're doing, because everyone wants to do one because they suddenly think they're profitable, or the quality goes down, and then they don't perform, and then everyone thinks they're dead again. Well, they're never really dead. It's just people always want a good rom-com. It's just people think about the cycle, so you just got to wait for the next kind of window.
I've always felt, though, there should be a legal requirement that people who write rom-coms should actually have had some successful relationships. I'm just saying.
Who in Hollywood has had successful relationships?
Yeah, wow.
No.
Exhibit A in the back with the camera.
That's an example. Yeah, exactly.
My husband. Tim?
No, I mean, I agree with both. When you have something that you're really passionate about, you don't typically just say, all right, this is just done. It might be pushed to the side until the timing is right. I mean, yeah, everything is cyclical. What isn't going to work now, the same exact project could work in a year or in 2 years, but if it's something that you love, you never forget about it.
I will say, in 1994, my husband and I started doing a movie about a greyhound racing dog who adopts a kid who runs track and field, and I thought, this will go forever. If I'm 105, I'll still be able to find a buyer. And then the United States outlawed greyhound racing. So onward to Ireland and Australia. So I want to talk to you all about brands. And I guess the obvious, when I first started hearing the term peanut butter falcon, I thought instantly, sponsored by Skippy. Was there any point at which you looked and said, that's cross-promotion?
I mean, like immediately when we were shooting the movie, we were using Peter Pan peanut butter, and they gave us a bunch of peanut butter, and then so we got 20 million at the box office, and then we have the Academy campaign coming. So I reached out to them, and I'm like, you guys should get involved in this and support it, you know, and but they were like, I can't remember who is the main corporation that owns Peter Pan, but they're just like, they don't care about Peter Pan peanut butter, and it's just not, like, I don't even know if they have
They're
a
like,
marketing
come back
budget.
to us when you got the jelly on board.
Yeah. Exactly. They said no, but we tried. Well, we also thought, you know, maybe the peanut butter falcon costume for like Halloween. Actually, oddly enough, we started seeing, which was pretty amazing. Cool. We saw pictures of like kids that like their parents basically made the homemade cutouts of the peanut butter falcon, which was pretty awesome.
I'm getting goosebumps. That's the kind of moment you want your movie to reach
Yeah,
to.
once you see that, you're just like, okay, you know, that's all you need.
So what
Yeah.
about you guys? I mean, do you ever go toward brands as a source of income?
Well, I will say, actually, just to speak to that, we did have a brand ahead of the campaign that reached out to us that was going to, that offered to put up a decent amount of money to help with the release of the film, but they wanted to like put their logo on the movie and do all this, and we're just like, I mean, if you want to put the logo on the movie, you need to write a check with 2 or 3 more zeros for us to give you something like that. So to answer your question, it's like you're open to it to a certain degree, because you just, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like your movie's your movie, and you don't want to make your movie some branded thing where it loses its originality, if you will.
Yeah.
There's also certain regulations in Europe about having brands in your like, it can hurt your release in certain territories if you have like obvious commercial branding in it. I'm not sure the exact regulations, but they're always really, it's always something as a producer, they're sending you stuff and you have to kind of attest to the fact that you haven't been paid to put stuff in there. But I don't know how the big studios do it with bigger movies. There must be a way to do it. But for me, it's all about it being organic. I mean, there's certain things. I just went to a couple companies. I'm doing a graphic novel, and I wanted to use a brand in the graphic novel, and I didn't want it to be fake brand, because I feel like brands give us emotions. And so I reached out to them and said, hey, I'd love to use your brand in this graphic novel. And they're like, well, what's the storyline? What's it about? And they're like, they gave me permission, you know? And so, you know, I mean, I think brands, when they are Greeked or fake, it's a little strange. Yeah. You know, the Founder was different. The Founder, because of the First Amendment, like anytime you do a movie as a producer, you're usually trying to Greek everything. Like if it's Pepsi, you're changing it to Popsy or whatever. And with Founder, we had to do exactly what the brand was. We had to have the logos that were exact, so we had a lot of historical reference and stuff like that, because that was our protection, was that it was real and it really happened. So.
And for those who don't know, the brand was?
McDonald's, yeah.
So Lydia, I want to ask you, because this is kind of an obvious question, but I think at this point maybe you've transcended it completely. How many of the roles that you get called in to interview or read for are specifically characters that have been written to be Latinx, and how many are just women who could fit into any category of diversity on the spectrum?
I think casting has broadened a little bit, so there are a lot of them that are not specifically Hispanic or Latino or Colombian or any particular nationality. Some of them are a specific nationality, and I have to do my accent work and make sure that I'm accurately representing that nationality. I've been cast in several roles that were originally written for men, and I'm excited about that too. There's a few roles that ended up really being a lot of fun that were originally written for men. So I think the casting is getting more interesting in my situation, at least. And I know that we're at SAG-AFTRA have a diversity committee, several different diversity committees that keep sort of keeping that sort of foot forward of looking at how we cast movies and trying to be more just imaginative, I guess, or open to looking at actors that you wouldn't have maybe thought of originally for a certain role and seeing what another actor can bring to it. So I find that the casting has become more interesting. I certainly remember, I'm a character actress, and I made the decision pretty early on that that was a more interesting career for me than whatever other options were available to me when I was younger. But I remember when Steve Buscemi was cast as a lead in Boardwalk Empire, at least in my lifetime, that was sort of like the realization that a character actor could be a regular in a series. So at that point, my goal became to be a regular in a series. And so I just did that. So that was fun. But I think that it's a measure, at least in my mind, that casting has become more interesting. And certainly watching television has become more interesting when you have such a wide variety of characters to get involved with. And I think casting has become more interesting and more exciting.
So how much do you guys think about diversity when you're casting a project? If it's written as a diverse character, do you just assume it is? And if it's not, do you just assume it's not diverse?
I mean, I'm a writer, and so I think about diversity way before casting. I mean, I try to think about it on the page as much as possible. I mean, I was fortunate enough to grow up in a very sort of diverse area, so it's just something that's part of my, I don't know, it's just part of how I think when I'm creating the characters and the parts. But as a producer, certainly you do the same thing. And the beauty of the world now is there's more and more, I think, as more diverse roles are created and cast, that there's just more and more, great actors coming to the forefront. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that it really depends. It depends on the project, and ultimately, and depends on the setting. But I think writers and creators in general are really trying to diversify and do something different and not be repetitive. And I think that speaks to diversification and take like what you were saying, Lydia. Roles written for men that are crossed over, and you can take that on. It's like that's the way it should be written. Great characters doesn't often depend on gender or diversity. It's just what's a great character. Do the movements change all that much? I don't know, but I think that's great that you're doing that.
Yeah, well, I think it occurs at different levels, because it's like there's one level of diversity and inclusion that has to do with casting with that in mind, but then also more people writing their stories. Certainly, I think the digital revolution made storytelling much more accessible, and I think that created an explosion of diverse stories that we see on YouTube and on Netflix, and it's exciting to. I moved here with my parents. My mom got a job in Texas when I was 3, so my experience as living in this country as an American has been roughly 50 years, and I remember when I was younger what television looked like, and that it was really hard to find evidence of Hispanic culture. Mm-hmm. And slowly but surely I discovered it. San Antonio, I ended up going to school there, learning that there had been such a Hispanic influence in the West and so on. Now I can turn on television and watch television in Spanish and Mexican Spanish. I have access to so much more just cultural diversity. Like I said, I speak French, so seeing a French movie used to be really hard. Now it's a lot easier. So I think there's just sort of like a digital revolution, because we have access to so much entertainment online, and that just explodes the amount of variety that you can have and create.
So I'd like to talk about.
Bless you, are you okay?
I'm totally fine. This is why old lady is never on the diversity program. I'd like to talk about what's your next project, and what's your pet project that you really want to get done, if you can talk about it.
Do you want me to start?
Sure.
Well, I'm planning on a really active pilot season. I still am an actor primarily, but I do have a couple of. I did form my corporation this year, and I've always sort of seen myself as a studio head in my mind. I always think of like projects that I like and all of the things that you guys have said that you've already done. You know, things that I love, projects that just attract me and excite me, and I can't really stop thinking about them and things like that. And so I'm attached now as a producer to 2 or 3 of those projects, and we're moving forward. There's a Christmas play that I have known and loved for many years that's moving from being just a stage play to we're turning it into a screenplay, and we've been taking steps on that. And I want to see that movie. You know, I really want to see that movie, and I want a lot of people to see that movie. And I've been involved in the play long enough that I know that people will love it, and it's just a matter of not enough people can get to San Antonio to see the play. I have also was really kind of. I had been given a screenplay to read a few years ago that a friend of mine wrote, and when I followed up with her, she had actually written a book that's about to be published, and someone is interested in that. They asked for an advance copy of the manuscript, and that's stories of women, like 8 different interviews that she did with women that represent the last century of immigrants in Colombia. So I kind of thought that was interesting because it's a subset of a subset of a subset of a very specific experience. My home country, that's where I was born, and then immigrants to that country. So reading those stories has been extremely fascinating, and I don't know exactly how they can be turned into audiovisual entertainment. I just know that there are stories that I've never heard before, and I'm very interested in that. And there's a few other projects that are sort of knocking about. Either there's a documentary that features a friend of mine that's already been completed. It's going through festivals, so I've got a little marketing package, and I'm looking, So I guess that's kind of it. I have a list of things that I'm always in love with and always looking for opportunities to talk about. And then sometimes some people are interested and it moves that much forward, and we just keep going.
Tim, what happens after Peanut Butter Falcon?
Well, we have a film that is just about finished. Well, it's being mixed right now, called El Tanto. It's Charlie Day's directorial debut. It's a comedy. I don't know when that's being released yet. And then there's we have a ton of projects in the works. I mean, really, you never know what's next until you're in pre-production. Even if you're in pre-production, sometimes it falls apart. So we have a project about Irina Sendler. She actually was responsible for saving more lives in World War II than any other individual. It was like 2,500 children that she saved. It's a really unique story because it was her and a group of like 4 or 5 women that basically defied the odds and somehow saved all these children without getting caught. It's a pretty powerful story. We have a bunch. I mean, Don and I have two comics in the works, and a bunch of stuff.
I have a graphic novel, a YA graphic novel called Loot that we just set up at a production company that we're taking out shortly. I have the things I'm doing with Tim. I actually just became partners and a board member in a indie comic label, so doing a lot more IP and comic stuff there as well. I'm also producing a horror movie adaptation of a Vietnamese horror film called Housemaid that Jeffrey Fletcher, who won the Academy Award for Precious, adapted. And we're doing it with CG Entertainment that did Parasite that we're hoping to get off the ground this year. So. And a bunch of other stuff that, again, you never know. You're always trying to put the pieces together. So.
Adam?
Let's see. Upcoming, we're in production right now on, what was called Ghost Draft. Now we just announced it's called The Tomorrow War with Chris Pratt, which will come out next Christmas. And then I got Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds that comes out July 4th next year. And then the Ridley Scott TV show, which for HBO Max will launch with the platform in May. And then upcoming, so that's all stuff for geared up for next year. I have a new film that we're in prep on now It's called Newsflash, which is, we've sort of just started to announce bits and pieces of this. This is, it's an original screenplay that I developed with a writer from New York named Ben Jacoby. And Newsflash is the day of the Kennedy assassination, but from the point of view of Walter Cronkite. And it takes place in real time from the time he gets the actual telegram that there was a shooting in Dallas until he goes on the air and announces that he actually died. And it's Alfonso Gomez Rejon directing, just has The Current War out, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, a couple other great films. And believe it or not, Chris Pine will be playing Walter Cronkite.
Wow.
Wow.
You'll trust me on that one. Just like Kurt Russell as Santa Claus.
I will trust you. I want to go back to you two because the comic book thing is really my current obsession. Do you think there's a market for doing nonfiction content? And I'm not talking about the historical comic books they use to get kids to read history. Do you think there's ever going to be a point where comic books can work in the world of like Serial or Homecoming?
I mean, yeah, there's a wonderful graphic novel I read. I think it's called Green River. It's about a guy whose dad was one of the detectives who was searching for the Green River Killer for decades. And it's really kind of a love letter to his dad. So it's got this whole true story of this detective hunting this serial killer, but it's really told with from his son's point of view and just the sacrifices he made as a cop and not being around his family. And it's just a beautiful, I mean, I don't know if it would ever make a good show or not, but it was just a beautiful read. And I do think it's a great medium for true stories. And, you know, I read it and was quite moved by it. So.
Okay, so, excuse me, before we open it up to questions, I'd like us all to play Futurist really quickly and tell us what you think a post-streamer world is going to look like. Because right now people are saying there's too many streamers and people are already coming up with more. So what do you think this post-streamer world will look like?
Well, I don't know if we're gonna. When does it end? I don't think it does. That's if you're just to look to the future. Like the future is this. So I think we're in the front end of this universe. I don't think we're in the middle of it or at the end or at the tail end. We're at the beginning of it. So I think that streaming and there's a reason why these companies are spending that amount of money to launch these things because they are going to be here for. You know, it's like, you know, DVDs were the new thing to a certain extent, or cable television was a new thing, or motion pictures in movie theaters was a thing. You can go back and say, how do these mediums change? How do they evolve? And I think we're in this new evolution. In a post-streaming world, that's some Philip K. Dick stuff. I can't even guess.
Anybody else want to venture?
I mean, look, I'm a huge video gamer, so I think AR and VR at some point will become something where it's almost like, what was that movie with Ralph Fiennes? Kind of ahead of its time.
Oh.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I know someone knows, but it's where you become the character, you know? You become the character. And Strange Days?
Yes.
Strange Days. I think there's something with that, and something with AR too, where the real world is combined with our world, and obviously storytelling is always a big part of that. But
We'll all enter the Matrix.
yeah, something like that. But it's just an interesting time. I mean, I look at the platforms and how each one is either a really obvious brand like Disney, or they're creating their own brand, and you know, it's kind of, I think, an exciting time for content creators. In that sense.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions now. Please understand that the longer you make a statement before your question, the fewer questions we get to ask. Also, if anybody starts to do anything that sounds like a pitch, I will cut you off, and I assure you I can go 0 to bitch in 6 seconds. So let's just ask quick questions, simple statements of question. I'll start with you.
I would say try to get a job with a producer or with one of the big agencies. You know, the agencies would be a good start because you kind of get a full view of everything and then kind of find out from there. You'll see a bunch of different producers, different types of producers, and you'll get to pick which one you think you might fit best with. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Going to agency or a management company, it's just, you just get a broad view of everything. It's kind of like you're going back to school and getting a whole nother education.
Yeah, getting a master's by going and being an assistant to somebody. But do your research, do your diligence, determine what type of world you want to enter into, what type of production company you want to, work with that's appealing to you, and then figure out your path to get into those types of places. But it's research and diligence.
You have a question?
Parrish, are we looking for ideas? Do you prefer screenplay or short story to be able to read through, or do you find ideas in journalism, but if it's presented to you, would you rather read it in a short story or script?
For me, it's like I always prefer like a log line. Like I kind of can tell from the log line if it's something that I might be into or not. It's just shorter and sweeter, and it also allows me to process more. Because if I get a script, sometimes I'm like, I can read it, but it just might take longer and sometimes get lost in the shuffle. But as far as finding content myself, I mean, it could be books, it could be, I read a lot of stuff online. I read a lot of, I don't know if you guys know what Quora is, but Quora is just a lot of human experience distilled, that I'm always seeing great stuff on there that I think could potentially be beautiful moments or beautiful stories. But really anywhere, just always kind of on the lookout.
You had a question or no?
So the question was, everything is we're in a creative universe. There's so many different ways that you can go with that question. The question is, how do you, just so people in the back, would you rather see something in a digital format? The truth of the matter is, speaking for myself, I guess, but probably for the producers that I work with as well, that I send material to, you want the screenplay, you want the actual script. The digital presentation, the visuals, they all help the sell. They're a little of the sizzle, but you have to sell the steak, right? That's the idea. You see the screenplay or whatever it is.
Yes.
Shit. Don't do drugs.
Don't do drugs. That's it. Well, I would say, the writer in me would say, get a job as an assistant in a writer's room, because it's the last true apprenticeship in Hollywood. That's what I wish I could go back and say to myself. As far as, don't do it. Find another job. I'm joking.
That's funny, but yes, that's true. I would say if you're waiting on somebody to move to the next level, or you're waiting on somebody to do anything in this business, then you're just always going to be waiting. I need to get to an agent, and then an agent's going to do this for me. They're probably not, even if you get to them. You got to work. You got to do everything yourself. Don't rely on other people, and just persevere and push, and don't be afraid to make calls, because a lot of times people will take your call, especially if you annoy them enough. But don't rely on other people, or else you're just going to be sitting there waiting forever.
Okay, last question. Yes, sir. May I? Learn technology.
Yeah.
This is your tool.
May I?
Yeah, well, I started as an actor, and I remember that Backstage West, and I would, staple all the things. But I think it's beautiful now, because I have friends that are actors that live where they want, and they just film their audition on this, and they send it in, and if they're right for it, they get the part. We get auditions from Europe and from. You can kind of tell a lot from this, and as an actor, it's great to not have to. It also opens up a diverse world for casting with international, actors and stuff like that are in Sweden or something. They're phenomenal actors who aren't going to be walking into, a lot of stuff's not cast here in LA anyway anymore. If it's not the main part, you're in Atlanta or you're wherever you're shooting. So I think it's a great thing to be able to just, definitely learn this and learn how hold it, and so you light yourself and you sound good, and the production side, the production elements of it are pretty easy to master, and I think it's an advantage. You can go to more places at once. I used to have to lick the stamps, and every Wednesday backstage West.
We used to hand deliver scripts too.
Yeah.
Like now you can email scripts, so it's easy.
Yeah.
It's easier.
Yeah.
It was also just a plot point on Get Shorty about doing video auditions on the phone.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
not my plot point.
So at this point, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I would like to thank my panelists, and
Thank you.
thank you.
And
Don't move, I need a selfie.
Oh, Get Shorty is based on that concept of this hitman who wants to get out of the mob by becoming a producer. So if you watch the series, you'll get some tips.
It does.
It's actually like he really just brought it to modern days.
Okay, everybody. Okay, do we have everybody?
Yeah.
Ish. Ah.